You can keep eating because I know we had a shorter little lunch break today, so feel free to keep eating. Phil gave his permission. It is, again, my honor to introduce to you Phil Arkow, who is the President and Secretary of the National Link Coalition. And I'll tell you a couple of little personal stories. But before I do, I want to let you know those posters out there for your organizations are yours to take. If they fit in your suitcase, take them. If you want to put them as a carry-on, whatever, not carry-on, yeah, whatever. They are yours to take, so please feel free to grab them after this session. So the first time I was exposed to the work that Phil does is when I think Marlene forwarded his monthly email to me. And it was very early on when I started this position, about a year and a half ago, and I was completely blown away by I am a researcher, I love information, I'm a lifelong learner, and I was completely blown away. And then Stacy told me about how important and impactful Phil was in getting on the Hill, along with her, and getting some of these laws passed. And that's not easy. And I just asked Phil, did you see yourself here? Did you know this is where you're going to be? And he said no. And I'm going to tell you that story. When we decided to put this conference together, we didn't decide to, when we started putting this conference together, because it's something that we were incredibly passionate about, and it's a really big part of our deliverable. We all wanted Phil to be a keynote. And I sent you an email, and I think we set up a call, I don't know. He said yes, okay? And I was ecstatic. And I think I forwarded the email to Stacy and Marlene and said, oh my God, he said yes in all caps. So many of you are probably, well, I know Lauren's very familiar with Phil because you did some work together. I forward his email to you guys every month. If you're on the email list, if you're not, see me. And I hope that you take the time to go through it. The resources in the work that he does every month, and it's a lot of work, is unbelievable. And it is our great honor that Phil agreed to be our keynote speaker, closing keynote speaker, talking about a salute to the pioneers protecting women's best friend. So this is very much, I believe, the story of how we got here, and very much the story of what's happening and where we're going. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Phil Arkow.
Thanks, Maggie. Yeah, oh wow, yes. It is an exciting journey. I've lost count as to how many different levels of energy Carol was talking about, but I know there's a lot of energy in this room, and that's really exciting, and that's what it's all about. I had a little bit of a dilemma because Maggie asked me to come, do a nice, rousing, close-out keynote that would inspire everybody, but then she puts me on the day that it's all about informing, so I'm going to do both. Okay, I will do both, absolutely. And she's right, we're talking about how we got here and what's going on and where we're going and where everybody fits into this. In the beginning, the link was very simple. And this is an idea that St. Thomas Aquinas was talking about in the 1200s and philosophers were talking about in the 1700s. And it really reached a peak in the Victorian era, the middle of the 19th century, that little boys who hurt animals grow up to become mean, nasty, ugly individuals sitting on Arlo Guthrie's Group W bench, for those of you who are old enough to remember Alice's Restaurant. And this is a typical thing from the time, 1850, from a Christian, school textbook. It's a couple of boys beating a donkey, and it says, what shows a worse disposition than to abuse a poor dumb creature? It's the beginning of a course that leads to robbery and murder. There's hardly anything which shows a more wicked heart, whether in a man or beast, than the wanton abuse of a dumb beast. Will not such conduct harden the heart and lead to other and greater crimes? And so when we talk about the link to most people, that's what they think of. Oh, he's going to grow up to become a serial killer because he killed a cat. Obviously, it's a lot more complex than that. Then came along Henry Bergh. Henry Bergh was the American ambassador to Russia in the Civil War years. He stopped off in London on his way back from St. Petersburg, not the one in Florida, the one in Russia, and saw the RSPCA, said, boy, we don't have anything like that in the U.S., and so he founded the ASPCA in 1866. And a mere 8 years later, he was asked to intervene on behalf of little Mary Ellen Wilson, an abused girl in New York City, got her out of there on a writ of habeas corpus. Family was prosecuted. She got turned over, became the first ward of the state. And for the next 80 years, many humane societies in this country had a dual function of protecting both animals and children. And this is what the link looked like. And this is what everybody thought about, okay? And there's an amazing irony about this, in that the child protection field is fueled by social workers. And I'll talk about this in a bit. Most social workers have no clue about the human-animal bond or animal cruelty, even though they're there to promote social justice. And the child protection field was actually started by humane societies. What's wrong with that picture? Well then, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, three amigos who were pioneers in academia and animal welfare tried to change the world by encouraging their peers to collaborate and recognize that child abuse, animal cruelty, domestic violence, and elder abuse are very much linked to each other. Who were those three amigos? Was it Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and Martin Short? Nah. They copied the idea from me. No. Who were they? Well, one was Frank Ascione, PhD in child psychology and child development, teaching at Utah State University, and was doing work on the impact of children harming animals. And Randy Lockwood, another PhD psychologist working with the Humane Society of the United States. And then some rough hippie living in the mountains of Colorado. And this was way back when, okay? How did I get here? Welcome to my world. How did I get introduced into this? As Maggie says, did I ever dream this is where I'd be these days? How I got here with a BA in English lit and a poodle. I started out as a newspaper reporter. I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with absolutely no marketable skills other than being able to string a few declarative sentences together and a French poodle named Toulouse. I took a newspaper job in Connecticut, and as Jimmy Buffett liked to sing, he said, some people claim there's a woman to blame. She and I were dating, but unfortunately she was also dating another guy, and he was beating the heck out of her. She wound up in the hospital. She and I decided we need to get the heck out of Dodge. So we rode off into the sunset seeking fame or fortune. We didn't find either, but we found 2 newspaper jobs in Colorado Springs. A year and a half later, we were breaking up, so I decided to get the heck out of that Dodge, took a newspaper job in upstate New York. Found one winter in upstate New York was a bad move. Anybody here from upstate New York? You know what I'm talking about, okay. Went back to Colorado Springs. The newspaper I'd worked for wouldn't hire me back because I had left them. The other newspaper wouldn't hire me because I'd worked for the first newspaper. So I was writing melodrama scripts and bussing tables, and I saw this strange thing that some of you are old enough to remember. It's called a want ad in a newspaper. And it was for a local humane society wanting somebody to do their education and publicity programs. At the time, there were only 5 other full-time humane educators in the country. And I knew the news business in Colorado Springs, and I had a poodle, so that qualified me. So I figured, okay, I'll stay there until the next newspaper job comes along. I haven't left. That was in 1973. That was me back then, yeah. Okay. Oh, thank you, yes. I like a fine wine, right? I found my tribe. I was absolutely fascinated by looking at people's lives through the lens of their animals. And we were taking in 60 animals a day in the shelter, and unfortunately killing 2/3 of them. But we saw absolutely everything, and we're investigating 1,200 animal cruelty cases a year. So I'm going around Colorado Springs, doing my education programs, putting out news releases, going on TV, doing all the marketing stuff that Maggie knows so well about. And I had a couple of light bulb moments, and this is now in the 1980s, and show you what they meant to me. One was a research study, came from my alma mater, University of Pennsylvania, and I frankly admit, if it had come from the University of Iowa or K-State or Berkeley, I never would have paid any attention to it. Because it came from Penn, I said, well, let me take a look at this. And a woman in the School of Social Work did a dissertation, And she looked at a year's worth of data from the SPCA in Bucks County, that's the county just north of Philly, and the Bucks County Child Protection Agency, and found in 9% of the cases they overlapped. Child protection and animal protection were dealing with the same families, but they weren't talking to each other. They were in silos, okay? And I thought, what's wrong with that picture? Child protection came out of animal protection 80 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever it was. Why aren't they talking to each other? That paper sat on a corner of my desk for 10 years because I couldn't figure out where to file it. We didn't have any category for it at the time. About the same time, I did an in-service training for some teachers in Colorado Springs. I brought a local veterinarian in to talk to them. At the time, I was the only delegate from the humane movement within the American Veterinary Medical Association. It was just me and 60,000 vets. Very strange fish being out of water, especially when you're working with 60,000 people who look like the species they represent. I'm not making this up. When you hear the sheep vet talk like this, and the equine vet looks like a thoroughbred, and the feedlot vet licks his tie like it's a cow lick, and the dog vet looked like a Cocker Spaniel. I am not making this up. Anyway, light bulb goes on. I said, Doc, every veterinarian I see is trying to prove they're a real doctor. And I know vets have a much harder job than physicians because their clients can't tell them, the patients can't tell them where it hurts, and they got to treat multiple species. But real doctors, and in fact, every teacher in this room is a mandated reporter of child abuse, are veterinarians. I didn't know whether they were mandated or not. He thought I'm innocent. As a matter of fact, I am. Turned out Colorado was the only state in the country that had the foresight to recognize that vets might in fact see abused kids. In 49 states, it wasn't on their radar screen. Now, I know Colorado's always been much more progressive in a lot of this. It's the altitude. You can see farther out there. I said, wow, great. Let me take that one step further. Would you have to report animal cruelty to us at the Humane Society? He said, no, why the hell would I ever want to do that? I might lose a client. And I said, what's wrong with that picture? Shouldn't the veterinarian be as proactive in responding to animal abuse as pediatricians are in responding to child abuse? So that's rolling around in my head. And then about the same time, I'm doing the after-dinner speech at our local domestic violence shelter's annual meeting. And I had absolutely no concept about what domestic violence was all about. I'm Guy, I know it's wrong, but I had no involvement with it whatsoever. I didn't even know there were kids in the shelters. Never even occurred to me. I'm waiting to go on. I'm looking at one of their newsletters just to get a feel for the audience. Open up the newsletter, and there on page 3 are 4 drawings by the children in the shelter about animals that have been killed or hurt or abused by daddy or mommy's boyfriend as a way to warn them that they could be next. And I remember thinking, boy, this is a whole aspect of animal cruelty we have never even heard about or paid much attention to. Again, this is the mid-1980s. So at the same time, Randy was working in this area at HSUS. He wrote this article called The Tangled Web of Animal Abuse, across my desk, and said, whoa, there's somebody else out there thinking about these things. And then about the same time, Frank and I were at an American Humane Association conference. I remember we were sitting by this swimming pool in a hotel, I think it was in Austin, and he was talking about his child development work. I said, well, there's an issue with domestic violence, too. And he said, duh, I never thought about that. And he wrote the first guidebook it was called Safe Havens for Pets. He came up with that term. And he had 40 different models there of off-site foster care models that existed at the time. Again, this is back in the 1980s. Randy was carrying on this work at HSUS. He had what's called the First Strike Program. I never got used to the title of that, but it seemed to work. I brought it to American Humane. American Humane said, well, if HSUS isn't doing it, I guess we better be doing it too. And we had a couple of summits. Again, American Humane had a child protection and animal protection division, and we published a number of materials. Allie Phillips was part of it too. Allie went on to start the safety program that I think all of you are fairly familiar with. And then Latham Foundation, President Latham was sitting on the American Humane's board, and Latham said, well, if AJ's doing this, I guess we better do it. So we started doing work with the Latham Foundation, and things started snowballing. And it's what I call the Italian kitchen philosophy. You throw enough spaghetti on the wall, something's going to stick. and it started to stick. Law enforcement and victim services began to see this. We were doing a training in Maryland, and the Baltimore Police Department had just started their first victim services unit. And they were all, the woman who had this program was really excited. They were about to go to press with these posters. They show a woman cowering in the corner with the shadow of the perp looming over her, saying, "Love shouldn't mean fear. If you're having a problem, call the police department." Those of you who remember some of the crises going on in Baltimore know the police department may not be the first place a lot of people want to call. But they were all set to go to press. And a woman came to our training, and the light bulb went on and said, "Boy, why didn't I think of that before?" And through the wonders of Photoshop, she put a dog in the poster. I say this because getting these solutions, as we were talking about yesterday, can be remarkably simple and very creative and don't take a lot of time or money. Meanwhile, you were developing, programs, and what we were talking about theoretically was becoming real. You were having people showing up at your doorsteps with pets, and they had no place to go. When Noah's House opened in, 2007, I think you said, okay, groundbreaking, literally. And, I mean, oh my God, a whole building just for the animals. Wow, okay. I was doing a program in Kansas City a few years later, right after the episode of the Rose Brooks Center, where Duke the Dalmatian, saved the life of a woman when they both got thrown out of a window and a guy attacked them with a hammer. So the theoretical was becoming real. And actually what we began to find was the domestic violence field was the tail wagging the dog. You were getting more involved with this in the child protection field because you saw the real need. People were coming to your doorsteps with pets in tow and no place to go. But we were all living in silos. We needed to connect the dots, and there were 4 forms of family violence. And of the 4, the animal cruelty side has always been on the periphery because it's only an animal, okay? People's needs are more important. Oh, all those animals get all the money. I see all those ads on TV. We don't get all the money. Of all charitable contributions in this country, less than 0.5% go to companion animal issues. And we in animal protection thought all you human services folks had your act together because you get all the money. Right? Okay? And you're dealing with people, and people are more important. Imagine our surprise to realize it wasn't until 1992 that the first national conference was held on the impact of domestic violence on children. And just like it had never occurred to me that there might be kids in the shelter, it hadn't occurred to those 2 sectors there that they might in fact have some common interests. About the same time, the National Clearinghouse on Abuse in Later Life came along and began to recognize domestic violence can affect older people as well. But again, we in the animal world were on the periphery. Well, the link changed that. We need to connect those dots. And we do it by getting rid of that model and replacing it with this. And that's what the link looks like. They overlap. Somebody was saying yesterday, nobody in any one of these fields has to be an expert on the others. They just have to be aware, know to report, know who to talk to, know who's who in the community. And some people are going to be smack dab in the center, and everybody can see multiple forms. They need to be able to recognize and respond and refer as appropriate. The need is still there. I love this quote. Jennifer Wolf is a forensic veterinarian out in the San Francisco area. She says, "The canary in the coal mine of an abusive home may literally be an abused canary. By responding to the injury or death of that canary, we can potentially save many other pets and people." And that's also important to remember because just as we were talking about yesterday, it's not just dogs and cats. It can be horses, it can be iguanas, it can be gerbils, and any number of other critters. She won't leave without them. I just love this poster. Harbor House in Florida had one of the earliest programs. They're still working in this area. I don't know if they're part of your program or not, but they're, been pet friendly forever. Why would we ask her to leave any of her babies behind? It's a great marketing line. So now fast forward, it's now 2008, and 25 of us who'd been working independently in this area got together in a hotel room in Portland, Maine, and we created this ad hoc group called the National Link Coalition, and it refers to how these 4 forms of family violence are linked. And, a lot of nonprofits address child abuse or domestic violence or elder abuse or animal cruelty. We're the only ones that are really addressing and linking all 4. And we work in 4 main areas. We showcase fantastic programs like the shelter programs you're doing. We look at public policy. We got 120 bills right now in Washington and state legislators and even Canada that we're following. We conduct public awareness and training programs like this, and we substantiate it all by compiling academic research. We have over 2,400 citations in our online bibliography. It's free for the taking, and one of the unusual things that we're noticing is over a quarter of those citations are now coming from other countries. And when we start seeing research coming from veterinarians in Serbia and domestic violence advocates in Kazakhstan and veterinarians in Ecuador, we realize this is catching on and people are beginning to take notice. And we have over almost 6,000 people now who get our free monthly link letter. And again, if you're not on the list to get it, give me your card or email me. I have 6,000 after today, you bet, okay. You should be getting it, okay? And it's all about multidisciplinary community partnerships, coordinate community response teams, multidisciplinary teams. It's about knowing who's who in your community, which most of you are already doing anyway. And working together, we can save more lives. It's as simple as that. We've identified 8 distinct types of links. I won't go into these in great detail, but you know about the domestic violence issue better than I do. I will show you in a moment how it fits into the power and control wheel. At one case, it was in I think last month's link letter, guy in, I think it was New Jersey, killed his girlfriend's cat to prove a point, to prove that he could do it. The URI study, Urban Resource Institute with the hotline, 97% of women say it's an issue, 50% won't leave if provisions aren't made available for their pets. It's a form of emotional extortion. And we have the same emotional extortion with child sexual abuse, where the little boy or little girl gets warned that if he or she talks, he's going to strangle her bunny, okay? We have a gap in the system. You may or may not be familiar with adverse childhood experiences. It was a term coined by a massive study by Kaiser Permanente and the Centers for Disease Control. They looked at 19,000 people over a 17-year period and found that early childhood traumas not only led to lifelong emotional distress, but also to people adopting riskier behaviors, which led to worse physiological health, which actually led to earlier death and greater mortality rates. Never once in that study did they include a child witnessing or committing animal cruelty as an adverse childhood experience, because it's only an animal, okay? What we do know is children committing animal cruelty is one of the earliest indicators of conduct disorder. It starts showing up at about the age of 6.5. We have bullying issues, and it's not just youths who bully others who are more aggressive towards animals, but youths who have been bullied take all that negative energy. I don't know where that was on Carol's scale. They take all that negative energy and redirect it at animals. We have animal hoarding issues, which are pernicious, intractable, 100% recidivism rate, can affect any age group, tends to be older, isolated women. We have dog fighting and cockfighting, which are, of course, horrible for the animals, but they're linked with narcotics, sex trafficking, weapons offenses, homicides, and a wide range of other crimes. Grossest area of the link is animal sexual abuse. There are people who prefer to have sex with animals. There are dark websites. There are what we call crush videos. That we now finally have federal laws outlawing all that. And every time we see an animal pornography video, we find child sex abuse going and child pornography as well. And then the school shooters, the mass shooters, or what CDC is now calling targeted violence, about 10% of them have histories of harming animals. How do we get here? Before I moved to North Carolina, I was in South Jersey. Just to prove that insanity runs in my family. After 25 years in Colorado, I moved to New Jersey. I mean, you know, you got to go somewhere, I guess. Anyway, I'm sitting on my desk, and I get this call from a woman in the parking lot of a shelter in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And the shelter wouldn't let her in. Fortunately, NCADV at the time had a directory of shelters. I don't think they're doing it anymore. I had a copy of it. It listed all the shelters in Wisconsin. It listed whether they accepted pets or not. I was able to direct her to another shelter, but it's what she said that just really got to me. She said, "I've loved this dog longer than any relationship I've ever had." And that's probably true for most of the clients that you're dealing with. with pets, okay? The emotional extortion, it's coercive control, and we're seeing more movement now legislatively to get animal abuse in this context defined as coercive control. A great study in New Zealand, and I love to point to it to show some of the international research, Mike Roguski's study back in 2012, said that it's a way for him to get revenge not only against her, but also her family and friends who help her escape. It's a way to retaliate against them. And they're literally holding the family hostage. He called it, called the animals pawns. As Mike was saying yesterday, the best way to tell the story is to tell a story. But the statistics back it up. And the numbers are boring, and I'll have to do some of those, but it's the individual stories. And I can't believe I'm about to quote Joseph Stalin, of all people. He said, the death of millions is a statistic, but the death of one man is a tragedy. And by focusing on one individual, people start taking notice, okay? Of course, it was Mark Twain who said there are lies, damned lies, in statistics. Okay, we can make numbers do anything we want. They're boring, but they are important. And you know all these numbers already. Frank Ascione, classic research in Utah back in the 90s, the numbers of women in shelters whose animals have been harmed. But equally significant there is the second number there. How many of them, their children, had harmed or killed animals? It's the intergenerational cycle of violence, and we've seen that similar pattern in any number of studies. Another study, 41% of intimate partner violence had offended or had committed animal abuse. There's an interesting study in Nashville a number of years ago. Nashville was facing a spike in domestic violence homicides. And they decided to try a unique triage system. So when people called the crisis line, they were asked 3 questions. They identified these as the 3 greatest risk factors for her dying. Okay? Does he have access to a weapon? Has he threatened suicide? And has he threatened to mutilate or kill the pets? If she answered yes to any of those, they put a special intervention in place. And I do not know what the intervention was. What we do know is that a year later, they found that the number of calls coming into the crisis line had increased 50%. We don't know whether it was more domestic violence or just better reporting systems. But even with a 50% increase in domestic violence, the rate of feminine deaths or femicide decreased 80%. That's how significant these 3 factors are as a risk factor. Another study was trying to identify what are the 4 greatest risk factors for somebody becoming an abuser. The first 3 were common sense and shouldn't surprise anybody. Low education level, substance abuse issues, history of mental health problems, okay? But the 4th factor that they hadn't counted on was this actual or their threats of harming animals. It's one of the 4 greatest risk factors. Andrew Campbell's doing amazing work in Indianapolis, correlating incidents of animal control with incidents of domestic violence. You put the 2 on a map, they overlay perfectly. I think it was Nancy yesterday was saying that the domestic violence is more aggressive when animal abuse is also involved. Absolutely. You all know how big a risk factor strangulation is. When there's animal abuse as well as domestic violence, the DV is more hands-on and dangerous. 3/4 of these women had been strangled. 70% of the guys had access to a firearm. A quarter of them had been forced to have sex. More than 3/4 feared for their lives. And one of the unusual things and significant things that Andrew found was that if you talk to any law enforcement officer, they will tell you the cases they fear the most are domestic violence cases, because it's volatile and you don't know who's armed and you don't know what you're walking into. And a lot of officers die investigating domestic violence cases. That risk of lethality doubles when animal cruelty is thrown into the mix. You all know. Yep, yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. To, yep. Yep. Okay. We've got copies of that research if you need it. This was the Urban Resource Institute and Hotline study. And you know the numbers there. Again, 30% said their children had witnessed or been aware of the abuse or threats. And this is what Nancy was talking about yesterday. 3/4 of women calling the hotline are not aware of what you are and your colleagues are doing. They don't know that we have some 300 plus pet-friendly or pet-inclusive shelters these days. We need to get the word out. And I'll give you a couple case stories. Behind all the numbers, there's always a personal story. And I don't know how much you believe in mysticism or odd paranormal things. This was one that happened to me. We had a case in suburban Philadelphia, Montgomery County, Upper Dublin Township. Police were called by the neighbors because they saw this Great Dane freezing in this homemade doghouse in the backyard in a snowy field and on a cold night in January in the Philadelphia area. Police went into the house. They found a dead 4-year-old boy. They called the Montgomery County SPCA. They took the dog away. The tenant was Reverend Javin McBurrows. He and his wife had 7 children, 3 of their own and 4 foster kids. Don't ask me how they got in the foster care system, because 6 of the 7 kids had been beaten at various times in their lives. Okay? The couple, the 6 surviving kids, fled to Atlanta. They were eventually apprehended, extradited back to Pennsylvania. He was convicted, got 22 years in prison. That's all. I don't know. That's what he got, okay, for the child's death. Several other things about this case. First, because the animal abuse occurs outdoors, and because the neighbors can see it and they know the dog can't pick up the phone and dial 911, okay, neighbors are much more likely to report animal abuse than domestic violence or child abuse or elder abuse. And so whoever investigates, in this case it was the police, but it could just as easily been the SPCA or Animal Services, they are first responders. And they are often the first point of law enforcement and or social services intervention for somebody's in trouble. So it's, just more eyes and ears in the community. Okay? That's point 1. Point 2, 4 years before this, McBurrows had been convicted of domestic violence. And 4 years before that, he had been convicted of animal cruelty. And none of the agencies in Montgomery County were talking to each other. They were in their silos. This was in 1999, okay? And then 4 years, 95 and then 91. And then the mystical point about this. I was following this case and was curious as to what had happened. And my wife and I, we were living in New Jersey. We drove across the Delaware River, went to a concert in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. And as we pass a newsstand, there's a newsstand on the corner. We're on our way to the concert. And I see the local newspaper and with a headline about the case and what had happened in the case. I said, oh, I need to get that from my files. Well, I'll pick it up when I come out of the theater, okay? Go into the theater, had a great concert, come back out, I forgot about the newspaper, okay? So I get in my car, it's a van, have the moon roof open. We're driving across the Tacony-Palmyra Bridge, for those of you who know the area, and the newspaper came flying in through the moon roof and landed on my shoulder. I have no idea how that happened, okay? Wow. Okay. Yeah, okay. Another case from Philadelphia. Philly isn't any more brutal than anywhere else except when my Eagles are playing the Raiders, but don't get me started. As Sandra Rutolo explained to the judge, she was thinking of her dogs when she pulled the trigger. For 13 years, her husband beat her, but one night he not only whipped her with a vacuum cleaner cord, he also grabbed one of her 4 German Shepherds and warned her that if she left, he would find her and slit the dog's throat in front of her. Later that night, as her husband slept, she loaded a .38 caliber pistol and pointed it at herself. A moment away from suicide, she looked at her eldest dog and said, Duchess, if I die, what's going to happen to you? So instead, she walked into her husband's bedroom and shot him. Go, girl. Sorry, I'm not allowed to say that. Neither did the court. She got 10 to 20 years for third-degree murder. Okay? Again, you know better than I do how the animals are pawns in all this. You're all familiar with the power and control wheel. Let me show you how the animals fit into this. We have the threats to harm or kill the pet if she leaves or asserts any independence, or the pet may just mysteriously disappear as a way to send a message. Okay, there's the isolation factor. He'll refuse to allow her to take the pet to the vet or go to the doggy park, which has replaced the village green as the place where everybody gets together. And when people and pets get together, magic happens. We all know that. We saw it during COVID. When was the only way you met your neighbors was walking the dogs across the street. Okay? The emotional abuse. He'll call her a bitch. He'll force her to drink out of the dog food bowl. He'll force her to watch animal pornography or even have sex with the animals as a way to further humiliate and control her. There's the economic abuse. He won't allow her to spend money on the pet's care and then blame her when the animal gets sick. There's the intimidation factor. I did it to your cat, I can do it to you. He'll use the children. He'll harm the kids' pets, blame it on mommy, use that to drive a wedge between her and the children. Of course, he'll minimize it and deny it, blame somebody else as he does for everything else. And then the legal abuse. Who gets custody of this animal if it winds up in a divorce because the animals are property? And I'll show you how that works out. I have been in shelters where, animal shelters, where one party brings the pet in to put it up for adoption so the other party won't get it in the divorce settlement. Okay? So, what have you, this faithful band of followers, accomplished? Well, a lot. Okay, what we're talking about here today, I whimsically call doggy witness protection programs. Okay, and I like to throw humor into this because these are obviously very emotional subjects. But there's been a lot going on. Co-sheltering all the victims of family violence helps everyone heal, people heal, and pets heal better when they're together. It removes the barrier. You know about all these programs. You know about Red Rover, the Purple Leash Project, of course. Allie Phillips started the Sheltering Animals and Family Together program. She's got her models for the 4 different co-sheltering models that are out there. Don't forget the PETS program, domesticshelters.org, Animal Welfare Institute, Safe Havens for Pets programs. There's a lot going on, and it's exciting to see how this is mushrooming. Some other things that have been accomplished. This was the first federal recognition of animal cruelty as a serious issue, okay? Animal cruelty legislation has always been handled on the local level, and it's always been handled by some 6,000 local agencies that don't talk to each other, and there's no national coordination. We put together the national directory on our website because veterinarians were saying, I don't even know who to call in my community. If you go to our website, you'll see 51 pages with 6,500 cities and counties. And it's bizarre. I mean, you got a domestic violence case, you call the state hotline. You got a child abuse, there's the state hotline. You got elder abuse, there's 1 or 2 hotlines. You got animal abuse, there can be 600 different numbers to call. It's absolutely ridiculous. But anyway, so we're starting to see the feds get involved with this because of its implications for human safety, because legislators don't care about animals because dogs and cats don't vote. Who was wearing that T-shirt yesterday? It said animal welfare is human welfare. It's exactly what it is. And this also illustrates the power of women to make a difference here. Nikki Thompson was a law student at Georgetown, I believe it was, and she was doing a paper for our law school class on the link. And she needed one piece of information. How many animal cruelty cases are there? So she asked her dad, John Thompson. John, at the time, had not had the light bulb turned on. He had a 40-year career at the time in law enforcement. He had started out as a local police chief, was a deputy sheriff. He was an MP in the military. Now he was the deputy director of the National Sheriff's Association. And in 40 years of law enforcement, this had never crossed his mind. And Nikki said, how many cases are there? He said, I have no idea. Nobody knew. So he called the FBI. About the same time, Mary Lou Randauer with Animal Welfare Institute was also asking the same question, and she got in touch with the FBI. Turned out the FBI was just in the process of changing their national data collection system, and they came up with what's now called NIBRS, the National Incident-Based Reporting System. And there are 4 types of animal cruelty now in that data system. And the numbers are imperfect, and we're not getting all the information, but at least it's a start. And it's the first time the feds really began to take notice of the fact that there are 4 forms of animal cruelty, and that they are serious, and that we need to, keep track of them. What came out of that? A year later, 3 federal counterterrorism agencies identified animal cruelty as not only a warning sign for individual acts of violence, but also for terrorism. Tell that to your grant committees as well, okay? We're working today with Homeland Security. They have a program, the Center for Positive Programs and Prevention, and they're interested in following up with this and doing work with the animal abuse side as well. 2 other women who made a difference, along with a whole slew of others, but Kathy Clark, a Democrat from Massachusetts, and Ileana Ros-Lawton, a Republican from Florida, 2 congresswomen. Took them 6 years and 3 different Congresses to get the PAWS Act passed. But it was an example of Republicans and Democrats actually can talk and work with each other. Wow, what a concept, okay? And they got the PAWS Act passed. You know about that. You're getting funding from it, so I don't have to tell you anything more about that. I mentioned how global this is becoming. We have resource materials on our website from at least 8 different languages, okay? And when you see papers coming out of Bulgaria and Turkey, you know that something is happening here. We're seeing major improvements in state laws, again, by focusing on how animal abuse is a human welfare issue. Back when we started talking about the link in the early 90s, only 5 states had felony-level animal cruelty laws. Today, all 50 do. Doesn't mean they're enforced, doesn't mean that all crimes are felonies, but at least somewhere on the books in every single state, there's a felony-level animal cruelty law. Sex with animals is now illegal in 49 states. Yeah. Anybody here from West Virginia? Oh, okay, that's good. National embarrassment. Yeah, okay. West Virginia, I like to joke, it's a state where men are men and sheep are scared. Sorry, it's my weird sense of humor, what can I say? But anyway, dark blue states are the states where it's a felony. Light blue states, it's where it's a misdemeanor. The gray states is where it's a felony on the second offense. But again, it's no longer tolerated as a normal act of kids growing up. Nancy was talking about this yesterday. We now have 21 states in which an act of animal abuse in the domestic violence context is legally classified as coercion or stalking or domestic violence and can be prosecuted as such. And we're seeing more and more movement there. And it's not just here. 6 states in Australia have enacted similar laws. And so we're excited about that as well because it gives us additional tools to work with. And again, it recognizes the significance of all this. I mentioned who gets the dog, in a divorce case, who owns the animal, because it is property. We now have 8 states. This started in Alaska. Who's the woman from Bethel who was up there on the stage earlier? Alaska pioneered this one, okay? 8 states in which divorce courts can specifically award custody of an animal in the animal's best interests, okay? Similar to a child custody case, and that's a major step forward. Remember that vet who said he might lose a client if he reported animal cruelty? We finally got the veterinary community kicking and screaming, and it's only taken 30 years. But we now have 43 states in which statutorily vets are either mandated or permitted to report animal cruelty, and often with immunity from civil and criminal liability for making a good faith report. The states in dark blue, veterinarians are mandated to report. States in green, they're permitted. That would be Nevada. The states with the check marks, they have immunity for making a good faith report. We still have 7 states to go. So if you're in Delaware, I think it's going to change next year. We just had a workshop there last week, and the vets in Delaware sound like they're intrigued by this. Pet protection orders, another example of one woman making a difference. Interesting story here. It started in Maine in 2005. The state already had cross-reporting of child abuse and animal abuse, and the State Bar Association conducted a seminar on the link And in an informal discussion after the seminar, a judge raised the idea of shouldn't we expand protection orders to include pets? And legislative support was overwhelming for this, and they took a bill to the state legislature. And again, you need the single individual story. Her name was Susan Walsh. She was a farmer's wife in Ellsworth, Maine. She was 50 years old at the time, I think. And she told the court, she told the committee, it wasn't just the cats and the dogs, it was the sheep and the chickens. I was terrified for their welfare. I knew if I were to leave, he wouldn't hesitate to kill them. He had done it before. She said, her husband had shot 2 sheep inside the barn, deliberately ran his truck over her border collie, which was deaf and blind. She stayed in her marriage for 12 years because of her responsibilities for the animals. And I mean, some of her quotes are just amazing. It's kind of hard to pack up a whole barn full of animals. I knew any animal I left behind would be dead in 24 hours. I've heard so many horror stories from other women that I knew I was not alone. Maine enacted the first pet protection orders in April of 2006. By the end of 2006, New York and Vermont had come on board, and today we have 41 states, and possibly 42 if Georgia gets its act together, in which pets can be included in protection orders. And Nancy was talking yesterday about how to work around that in states that don't have that. They certainly make sense. The need is there, okay? The public cares about animal abuse and domestic violence, and so do politicians and elected district attorneys and elected judges. And we tell them, the dog and cat may not vote, but 60% of your constituents have pets and they vote. That's something that causes them to sit up and take notice. The framework is already in place, and I'll show you an example of how simple it is to add pets into protection orders, and many of them incorporate farm animals as well. Surprisingly, we found a lot of opposition to these laws, and some of it came from the domestic violence community. We had a number of states where the DV people finally got the laws they wanted. They didn't want them reopened. They were afraid that reopening the domestic violence laws might make things worse. They saw these as a threat, not an enhancement. We have seen resistance from the gun lobby. God forbid we should get the NRA against us, okay? God forbid some guy should go to jail for violating a protective order because he kicks the girl's cat, okay? He won't be able to go hunting. And the NRA has successfully used that argument on a number of occasions. Lawyers have argued that the animals could already be included as property. Why do we need something else in there? Or who owns the dog or the cat or the gerbil or the canary in a communal property state? Legislators are wary of the animal rights agenda. It's too far left for them. It's just something they can't handle because human needs come first. So we're encouraging, bring these bills forward through the domestic violence agencies. Let the animal people stay in the background. You have a much stronger voice with the legislature than the animal groups do. There's a lot of misguided perception that people care more about animals than children. We're just saying in a civil society, we can't tolerate any form of abuse. There are divisions in the animal field whether, animals should be returned to an abusive home. And what do you do with agricultural animals or animals that have some kind of commercial value? There are some strategies to overcome this opposition. Again, lead the charge from the DV field, get data and individual emotional stories that tell the story. Keep it simple. Explain how the changes are minimal. You're just adding a little language to the existing law and the forms. There's no additional cost to this. And try to get the bill assigned to the Criminal Justice Committee or the Family Affairs Committee. Do not get it sent to the Agriculture Committee, which is where every animal welfare bill in every state in this country goes to die. I will give you an example. I love telling these stories. We were trying to get a bill passed in Colorado to ban dogs riding untethered in the back of pickup trucks. Okay? Makes common sense, right? So we took the bill to the state legislature, and of course it went to the Ag Committee, and of course it died. So we went back to our drawing board and took 2 years and did our homework. We got the support of the State Sheriff's Association. We got the support from the chiefs of police. We rewrote the law so it only pertained to the 7 counties along Colorado's Front Range between Fort Collins and Pueblo, the heavily populated areas. We exempted farm vehicles that had farm license plates. We made up some bogus numbers from the insurance industries to how many automobile accidents were caused by people slamming on the brakes when dogs flew out of the back of pickup trucks. We go back in 2 years later, goes back to the Ag Committee and gets defeated again, but this time for something we couldn't possibly foresee. And this is the political reality we're all dealing with. There was no law banning children from riding in the back of pickup trucks. And no legislator wanted to explain to his constituents that we cared more about animals than children. So instead of taking the Link approach saying, well, why don't we regulate children riding in the back of pickup trucks as well, they just killed it. Presented as a human welfare bill, not an animal welfare bill. Pet protection orders, as I said, they're in 41 states. The language varies. Some states protect animal or any animals. Some are limited to companions or pets or household animals. Some say domesticated animals. Some specifically exclude livestock. We've got copies of all these laws. This is a fairly standard one from Florida. In the interest of time, I won't go over that. Some states have some unusual provisions or nice ones. In New Jersey, when the person's abused or threatened to abuse the animals, there is a presumption that the possession shall be awarded to the non-abusive party. Ohio has a similar provision for dating violence. Utah has the same thing for cohabitant abuse. Oregon, like many other states, prohibits harming service or therapy animals. Tennessee, in no instance shall the animal go to the respondent, but instead will go to the petitioner. Washington state law, sets a specific, court's going to set up a specific physical distance that the guy has to keep away from. How do you do it? It's real simple. This is Wisconsin. I know you can't read all this, but this is the Wisconsin standard, temporary restraining order or protection order form. And all they had to do is just insert 2 lines in the form, okay? It's real simple, okay, for those of you who don't have this. Bottom line, do they work? We don't have a lot of data. Nancy mentioned this yesterday. We've only got data, and it's partial from only 2 states. Minnesota started pet protection orders in 2010. They had 3 years worth of data and then stopped collecting them. But over a 3-year period, there was a 640% increase in cases. New York State has a lot more data from 2007 up to 2020, 3,400% increase, okay? Once the word gets out, and people know about them, and courts are trained to issue them, and attorneys and advocates start promoting them, demand increases dramatically. As we were saying yesterday, if we build it, they will come. Let the people in your court systems and the attorneys, and you're working with them, let them know that you have these provisions if they're not already familiar with them. Okay, you pioneers, where are the new frontiers? Where are we going from here? Well, one thing, we were talking about coordinated community response teams yesterday and multidisciplinary teams, also domestic violence task forces. We need to get the animal shelters and the animal people plugged into that. And I love this quote. It's one of the most meaningful ones I've ever seen. It came out from a market research study in Canada looking at what's going on in animal shelters. And I'll read it to you because it's so significant. The philosophy in the animal welfare community is switching to addressing human problems that underlie crises with animals. Animal shelter service philosophy is evolving to recognize that treating the symptoms of animal welfare problems, such as animal homelessness, abuse, and neglect, is only a stopgap solution. To be truly effective, the underlying causes, such as community and family dysfunction and violence, must be addressed. Those of you who are working with animal shelters know what I'm talking about. They've already made the leap, and they're working with you. But there are a lot of shelters out there that haven't so far. But in many large cities, they are already beginning this process. We need to get animal shelters to take social workers on board to deal with the problems at the upper end of the leash. And there's an exciting new field called veterinary social work. It was a collaborative program started at the University of Tennessee about 12, 14 years ago now, between the School of Social Work and the veterinary school, training social workers to work in 4 key areas here: animal-assisted therapies, the link, animal-related grief and bereavement for, clients whose animals have to be put to sleep, but also for wellness training for vets and their staff. Veterinarians have one of the highest rates of any profession right now for a wide range of issues, okay? And compassion fatigue and conflict management, dealing with the irate client. All of these issues pertain to animal shelters as well. We have only a handful of animal shelters that have veterinary social workers, but we have some 400 veterinary social workers out there, either in practice or in training. So it's a small but growing number. But there is an enormous gap in the system because most social workers do not know about this. The veterinary social workers are what I call the few, the proud, and the eccentric. Okay? There are so few of them, but most schools of social work don't train on this. And so we have what we call the pause gap, the pet and people and animals' welfare and safety. Most social workers don't realize that their clients will have pets. And what happens to those pets, not even necessarily in an abusive situation, but whether it's rental housing or whatever else, it's going to affect their lifestyle, their decision-making, their quality of life. And the numbers are depressing. There are 889 BSW and MSW programs in the U.S. Only about 31 even mention the human-animal bond. That's less than 3% of all schools of social work are even mentioning the fact that their clients might have animals, and if they do, it's a peripheral issue. And they don't allow students to do their field placements at animal shelters. There are about 728,000 social workers, there are about 400 veterinary social workers. That's 1/20th of 1% of the total profession. We don't know why this is. There's some old school thinking, animals aren't as important as people. Animal lovers don't go into social work. The College of Social Work, Council of Social Work Education hasn't come on board yet. Those of you who are social workers can work from within because people listen to their own tribe and try to get more social workers on board with this. We need to change it. We need to get veterinarians plugged into LINK programs. There is a movement called One Health here in the U.S., or it's One Welfare in UK and Canada and other countries, recognizing the commonalities between human and veterinary medicine. And the One Health movement focuses on animal welfare, human well-being, and the environment. And within the One Welfare umbrella, there's animal and human abuse, protecting animals and people, domestic violence, child abuse, reducing crime, cross-agency collaboration, an outstanding opportunity for veterinarians to begin to recognize that this is part of their health mandate as medical providers. This started in New Zealand back in 2015. The New Zealand Veterinary Association joined a national movement in New Zealand to reduce domestic violence. And I love the way the Vet Association phrased it. They said veterinary medicine is a three-dimensional profession, a unique voice that transcends animal life, human life, and the environment. The movement spread to Scotland the following year. Scotland put £1 million into a national campaign to combat domestic violence. They decided they needed to identify which three professions are on the front lines that are most likely to encounter an abused woman, and they would get the training from this money. And the three professions most likely to encounter an abused woman are veterinarians, beauticians, and dentists. Okay? They're one of the three professions most likely to encounter an abused woman. It came to the United States here in 2018. You may have seen this video that went viral. Woman in DeLand, Florida was being held captive at gunpoint by her boyfriend. She was able to convince him that the dog needed to go to the vet. She goes to the vet. He's able to leave the dog with him. She goes into into the restroom, writes a note on a piece of paper, slips it to the front desk, says, "I'm being held at gunpoint by my boyfriend, call the police." They called the cops, separated them, and he was hauled off. And we're seeing movement on this internationally, but not in the U.S. yet. The New Zealand Code of Professional Conduct for vets, so when you're confronted with animal abuse, consider whether people in that home might be at risk as well. In the UK, given the links between animal, child, and domestic abuse, a veterinary surgeon or veterinary nurse should consider whether a child or adult in that home might also be at risk. We're trying to get veterinarians here in the U.S. to do the same thing. You're probably familiar with the movement for extreme risk protection orders because firearms are such a huge issue in domestic violence. We have a couple of cases, Maine being one of them, where harm to or threats to the animal can be grounds for getting an extreme risk protection order. Claire and Nancy were talking about this yesterday, getting more domestic violence shelters to include pets in their safety planning material. Real simple to do it. We have samples of these on our website. Animal Welfare Institute has material on their website as well. A couple of other things. It's not just a go bag that include all the pet's supplies, but get all the documentation in her name. Get the license, the rabies chip, rabies tag, the microchip, the pet food bills, the vet bills, the pedigree papers. The more you can show that she has been the primary caregiver for this animal, the better her chances will be of getting custody if it gets down to that point. Expanding this whole experience to help people who are unhoused. And we've been talking about that all the last day or two here. Street people with their pets, those animals have an increased significance for them. There's an intense emotional bonding. They're magnets for communications. They're magnets for contributions. There's a sense of safety and security. Keeps them warm at night, okay? And we need to get more homeless shelters following what you're doing in DV shelters to accept pets. I love this resource here. I saw this at a conference in Scotland, in Edinburgh, a number of years ago. It's called Sleeping Rough, R-U-F-F. Sleeping Rough, R-O-U-G-H, is the British term for what we call street people. This was a documentary on the streets of Edinburgh with homeless people, street people, with their pets, talking about how significant the animals were to them. The Scottish prose is a little difficult to wade through, but definitely worth it. Incredibly touching stories there. I believe it's still available on Vimeo. If you just Google Sleeping Rough and then put in Edinburgh, Scotland, you should be able to find it. It's worth watching. We're working with the National Alliance of Family Justice Centers right now. We've been talking to them now for several months, and we are collaborating together on a toolkit to advise family justice centers on how to screen for animals, solve animal problems, screen for animal abuse, and do all the same things you're doing in domestic violence shelters. And we hope to have some exciting news about that here in the not-too-distant future. Where are the new frontiers? Well, in legislation, we have a few things on the federal level, but of course, given the political climate these days, I'm not excited about anything getting through. We have a couple bills pending right now. The Child and Animal Abuse Detection and Reporting Act, that would direct Health and Human Services to include data on animal abuse in the National Child Abuse and Neglect Database Clearinghouse. Given who's in charge of HHS this day, again, I'm not necessarily holding my breath. The Animal Cruelty and Enforcement Act would establish an animal cruelty crime section within the Department of Justice. These are a couple of bills that have been introduced repeatedly over the last couple of years. We're hoping they get reintroduced. The AVERT Act, Animal Violence Exposes a Real Threat of Future Violence, would order the National Institute of Justice to conduct a $2 million study on the underlying reasons why people commit animal cruelty and analyze it as a predictor of violence against people, and also fund $2 million in Stop Future Violence grants to develop and strengthen effective detection and intervention strategies. There's also the PUP Act, which would provide funding for unhoused people with pets. So we'll see if those go anywhere or not. In closing, a little bit about the significance of pets in your clients' lives, and it's another story. I started at the Humane Society in Colorado Springs in June of 1973. And a couple months into the job, I got a call from a local nursing home. And they said, "Can you come bring some puppies?" And I said, "Sure, I'll talk to anybody who will listen." That's why I'm here today. So we had this old Ford Econoline van that wasn't being used. And I am talking, this was the grossest piece of equipment ever invented. It was this white van, and it had Petmobile in this horrid pink script. It sort of looked like the pink you see on oh, what's it? The phone company, whatever it is. Anyway, horrible shade of pink. Pink, script letters, a foot and a half high, even on the roof, okay? It had cages in the back. So I shanghaied a secretary, a couple of puppies from the kennels, went out to this nursing home. And here I am, this 26-year-old bearded hippie, walking in with puppies under my arm. And I see a lot of little old ladies with love in their hearts and time on their hands. And I say, you want to play with my puppies? And they all said, you betcha. So spent an hour or two there, had a lovely afternoon. Went back to the shelter, and I said, I don't know what that was, but that was magic. Got to do it again. So in a fit of marketing strategy, I sent out a letter to every nursing home in Colorado Springs. Said, we have this fabulous program. It's time-tested. It's proven. You'll love it. Can we come visit? And they all said, you betcha. So we started making visits. Next thing I knew, I had done 2,000 visits to nursing homes, hospitals, rehab centers, detention centers, any place where there were people, in need with the healing power of pets. And one of these people was Maud. She was happened to be this first nursing home that we had gone to. And Maud was in her 90s. She had an incredibly sharp mind. She had been a teacher, backstory. She had been raised on a farm in western Missouri, but her father was a Methodist minister and was very strict and would not allow her to dance. So when she was a young girl, she ran away from home, wound up on the plains of eastern Colorado, married, had a family, taught school in a one-room schoolhouse for many years. And now here she was decades later, living in a nursing home. Biggest smile I think anybody I've ever seen. One tooth, sharp mind. Anyway, so I came every 2 weeks to visit her and the other people in the home. And one day, just completely out of the blue, she has a puppy in her lap and she's petting the puppy. And completely out of the blue, she says, wasn't that terrible the way they tried to shoot the president? And this was right after the assassination attempt on President Reagan. And I said, yeah, I can't imagine why anybody would want to shoot President Reagan. She said, I don't think that's his name. So I say, are you thinking about President Kennedy? She says, that doesn't sound right either. Okay. So I just kind of sat back, and she's sitting there petting the puppy, and she's got 90 years worth of bites of memory floating around between her ears. A few minutes later, she pops up and she says, McKinley. She had been a 9-year-old girl when the news reached the farm in western Missouri that President McKinley had been shot. And for those of you who fell asleep that day in history class, that was in 1901. Okay? That put history into perspective for me. Okay? I realized there are people who remember, that. And it put the whole 20th century in perspective for me. Okay? I love this story because, particularly when I'm working with people who are working with children, I say, all the kids you're working with are having these exact same experiences with animals. This dog had taken her back 80 years in time, okay? That's the incredible power that pets have for us, particularly for children. And whatever people are going through with their pets right now is going to resonate and reverberate down the entire course of their lifetime, okay? So again, you see this, of course, with the people coming into the shelters. It affects everybody. We all have our stories. We all remember our own childhood experiences with pets. Who are the pioneers of these new frontiers? You. All of you. Just some of the amazing people I've had the pleasure of meeting here today, this week, yeah. Yeah. Why do you think I was taking pictures? Okay. I wanted to embarrass you last. Right? You are the pioneers. You're carrying this forward. And, I'm thinking globally, you're doing it locally. And some of you will go on to do it globally as well. And some of your programs will not only resonate with the clients you're working with, but others will pick up on that and come up with new aspects of it. And, it's not just, oh, here's a different type of flooring that works for your kennel, but, it'll be some new aspect of this we haven't even begun to think about yet. How are you going to make it happen? give you a couple words of wisdom. I always love to say this. You're not alone. And the value of a meeting like this as opposed to a Zoom call is there's absolutely no substitute for I love Zoom. We do it all the time. It's a really great medium. But as Marshall McLuhan said, the medium is the message. And there is no substitute for FaceTime and interaction. And actually, most of the learning goes on at the pool or in the bar or on the bus, the shuttle bus or whatever, okay, rather than the classroom here. We all need a shelter to cry on. And when you realize you're not alone and other people around the country are dealing with the exact same issues, it helps. Or to quote the great anthropologist Margaret Mead, she said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So we've come a long way in a short period of time. I mean, it was in 1962 that Henry Kemp and his colleagues in Denver and Cincinnati coined this term, the battered child syndrome. That term did not exist before 1962. Back then, kids who showed up in emergency rooms with spiral fractures and bruises were called accident prone. But by calling it a syndrome, by having the cachet of the Journal of the American Medical Association underlying it, by having it written by physicians with all their cachet, Congress took note, and 8 years later, the Child Abuse and Prevention and Treatment Act was passed and created the national system of child protection agencies we have today. Imperfect, but at least there is a national system in place. 1979, Lenore Walker wrote the classic, The Battered Woman Syndrome, which was largely responsible for getting where we are today in domestic violence work ramped up and into public consciousness. Helen Munro, a veterinarian in Scotland who I've worked with, coined the term battered pets in the Irish Veterinary Journal of all places in 1996. So like I said, we've made a lot of progress in the cosmic scope of things a relatively short period of time. But it takes time to change the world. So be patient, okay? Plant your seeds and watch them grow. Robert Louis Stevens said, "Don't judge each day by the harvest you reap, but by the seeds you plant." So that's about it, okay? I'll take some questions here. Let me see if how are we doing on time? We got to what, 2 o'clock? We got 17 minutes, okay. Questions, thoughts, comments, Rotten Tomatoes, yeah. I think this is being recorded, isn't it?
It's being recorded, and I also was going to download them and make them a PDF.
Okay.
And then upload them to Litmus. Yeah.
Excellent, okay, you bet. Yeah. All the way in the back, yeah. Stacy. The Blue Book has one of the world's longest titles. It's called Child Abuse, Animal Abuse, and Domestic Violence, Linking the Circles of Compassion for Prevention and Education. Frank came up with that title figuring anybody doing a search for any one of those words would find it. It was published by Purdue University Press in 1999. Randy and Frank did another book. It's a compilation of linked papers that came out in 1998, also by Purdue University Press. And just this week, Purdue asked all three of us for permission to reprint these books and make them available free for online access, open access books. So as soon as I get back, I got to sign my contract, and it should go up online here at some point in the near future. But yeah, Randy calls his book the Old Testament and mine the New Testament. Right. Yeah. I will mention that, Lauren, to the folks at the National Alliance. I'm not sure where they're at with that. Sarah Reichenberg from Sonoma was saying, if I can help out with the veterinary aspect of that, I will. So you bet. We'll see where they're at. Right now, I've written a massive first draft for them to look at, and they're starting to pick it apart and add more things. And so I'm not sure where it's at, but we'll let you know when it's available. Watch this space for for news, right? Yeah.
Do you have any tips
Good question. I call it DV and the DVM. It's taken 30 plus years to get vets, kicking and screaming into, at least thinking they should be reporting animal abuse. But putting them into the domestic violence world really scares them, okay? And I can't say I blame them. I understand it. Veterinarians are extremely well grounded and trained in dealing with animals. They don't know how to deal with the upper end of the leash, okay? They're not people, they're animal people. Now, many of them go into veterinary medicine because they don't like working with people. The animals are safer, okay? And why, it's only been recently that they've gotten communication skills training or wellness training or dealing with, the soft side of veterinary medicine. And in fact, most of the vets who we see that are active in this are not the small animal practitioner, down the street in the shopping center. They're working in animal shelters, or they're in animal behavior, or they're working in university teaching hospitals. So they're not, your basic local vet. So there's still some barriers there just on the animal side as well. They will launch arguments by saying, I haven't had training on this. Vets are extremely susceptible to not thinking outside the box if they haven't had specific training on it, because all their training is, you see this, here's how you solve it, and you move on to the next one. Yeah. 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 They may or may not know, and if they know, they may not be reporting. And again, we don't have any data in terms of, how well they're. The only place I've ever seen reporting stats was from Massachusetts. About a year or two after they instituted mandated reporting, the number of calls going into the Massachusetts SPCA went up dramatically. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but we haven't seen anything since. How to approach them? A couple of ways. One, 70% of veterinary students right now are women. The field is rapidly changing. Theoretically, they should be more sensitive to the domestic violence issue. But 100% of the profession says, if I haven't been trained on it, it isn't something I can solve, clinically, I'm afraid of it. So we have to break down those barriers somehow. It's probably just as simple and as difficult as opening a line of communication, one-on-one with your veterinarian. Talk to the people you know. Find out what their barriers are. Why won't they help? How many of you, I know a number of you have programs with local vets who are helping your shelters. How many are doing that? Okay, so the programs are in place, okay? Talk to your colleagues. How did they do it? How did they reach out to the vets? We are meeting right now, actually May 27th will be our next meeting. I got a call from a veterinarian at a university, Lincoln Memorial University in Eastern Tennessee, who was wondering the same thing. Why aren't vets more involved with domestic violence? And he was talking to his local sales rep from Purina, okay? And so the three of us had a Zoom call, and the Purina sales rep is going to try to move it up the ladder within Purina because, they're funding the Purple Leash Project. Could they, do something like this and, come up with training programs for veterinarians, getting it into the vet schools, getting materials, getting more veterinarians to work with DV shelters. So we'll see if that goes anywhere. That's a great question. Yeah.
I think there's two interesting points. One, I will quickly to piggyback on Phil's point. The veterinarian hospital that serves the pets that come into NOAAs that require more extensive medical care are our now biggest champions, right? And they donate to us every single month. They send out letters to their clients about us. So, we end up spending quite a bit of money with them every year, and through that experience and work, it really has opened the door one starfish at a time. The other dynamic that I think is really changing, and 30 years, but we're getting momentum, is there's fewer and fewer independent vet veterinarian hospitals and more Banfields and corporate veterinarian facilities, because there's so much money in it and margin, that now Mars owns. So we have an opening as they, I think, become more corporate and public company driven, with most of them with food at the top of their revenue stream. So I think we finally have momentum because of the small fact of 30 years ago, everybody was a mom and pop veterinarian. And now 90% are corporate, independently bought up vet hospitals. And that changes the dialogue quite a bit, because you reach a lot with one.
Yeah, we get Mars and Banfield and VCA, and then there's other national chains, to buy off on this. We will make great progress. Some other thoughts? Okay, well, I know, oh yeah. Yeah, and we have some of those on our website and materials for them, yeah.
How many people are signed up for the newsletter already?
All right, great.
I'm still going to forward it.
Okay.
Got to get over 6,000.
Right, yes.
Want a campaign, people.
Yo, 6,000 or bust, yes. Okay.
My niece is a vet. She's a vet
Yeah.
in Colorado, and I'm making contact with her because of all the people she graduated with who she can share it with. And she just graduated a year ago, and she's Marianne's daughter. So she's, I mean, it's grassroots.
Yeah, and one of the things I've had to learn the hard way is that, contrary to what Stacy says, there's not a lot of money in it. They may have good profit margins, but it doesn't mean the local practitioner gets them. Yeah. I think the average now is a veterinarian makes about 1/3 of what a physician makes if they're lucky. Every single veterinarian I have ever met, and they could have been out of school for 50 years, they're still paying off their student loans. Okay? And that's one of the reasons for the high suicide rate. They go in there thinking they're going to make a living, and it's really difficult to do it. So in addition to their amazing technical skills and their amazing sense of compassion and all the things they want to do, the reality is they're small business people, and they are worried about paying their bills. And it doesn't give them a lot of freedom to think outside the box. Not to mention, well, corporate offices, I can only spend 7 minutes with a patient. And these types of cases take time,
Unlike Bethel, Alaska, we have one on every corner. I mean, we have a lot of them, and I wish I could gift you one to take home with you.
Yeah, and I mean, towns like Bethel, Alaska, there is more of a communitarian spirit, okay, in smaller communities, particularly on islands, particularly when cold weather is a factor, where people know they have to band together. So you get that, which you don't necessarily see in large cities. Bless you. That's right. The high desert. All right, well, I know the only thing keeping you from the bathroom is me. The only thing keeping me from the bathroom is you. So let me wrap up here. We'll just leave you with some more words of wisdom here. Somebody was saying this morning that, it was one of the people on the panel about, we animal people like working with dogs, rather than working with people. So I would encourage you to live your life like a dog, okay? It's a lot, how many of you have dogs? Okay, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, yeah. Live your life like a dog. Bark less, wag your tail more, let people pet you. Take more time to relax and play, and please don't poop on other people's lawns. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so very much. You are a very gracious human being, and we appreciate you being here today.